The ballroom shimmered with gold light and quiet power. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, and the soft sound of string music floated through the air. Waiters moved carefully between round tables covered in white cloth and fresh flowers. Every guest wore something expensive. Diamonds caught the light. Watches gleamed. Laughter rose and fell like gentle waves. It was the annual charity gala, the kind of event where people came to be seen as much as to give. Cameras flashed near the entrance. Reporters stood ready. A large banner near the stage showed the name of the foundation that supported arts education for young people. At the center of it all was the woman everyone had come to see. She was known for her sharp business mind and her even sharper tongue. She had inherited a massive fortune from her family and turned it into something even bigger. Her companies were everywhere: technology, real estate, media. She was young, confident, and used to getting what she wanted. Tonight, she wore a deep red gown that seemed to command attention. When she walked, conversations paused. Near the back of the room, sitting at a smaller table far from the stage, was a man in a simple dark suit. The suit was clean and pressed, but it was clearly old. His shoes were polished, though the leather had begun to fade at the edges. He did not stand out in this room of wealth. Most people barely noticed him. He had not come for attention. He had come because he believed in the cause. He worked long hours during the week and rarely attended events like this. A friend had given him the ticket at a discount, knowing how much he cared about music programs for children. He almost did not come. He felt out of place the moment he stepped inside. Still, he stayed. Across the room, the billionaire stepped onto the stage. The lights softened, and the music faded. She took the microphone with ease, smiling at the crowd as if it belonged to her. "Thank you all for coming," she began. Her voice was smooth and practiced. "Tonight we celebrate generosity. We celebrate art. And we celebrate talent." The crowd applauded politely. Behind her, covered in black cloth, stood a grand piano. It was revealed with a small dramatic pause. Gasps moved through the audience. The instrument looked flawless, polished so brightly that it reflected the lights above. She continued speaking. "Music has always been close to my family," she said. "My grandmother loved Chopin. She used to say that real talent shows itself when the pressure is high." She paused and looked around the room, her eyes scanning the guests. "So tonight," she said, "we will do something different. I will donate a very large amount to this foundation if someone here can come on stage and play Chopin for us. Live. No rehearsal. No warning." There was a ripple of surprise, followed by soft laughter. Some guests looked at each other nervously. Others shook their heads. She smiled wider. "Come now. Surely among this crowd of successful people, someone can play." Silence stretched across the ballroom. A few people avoided eye contact. Some whispered that it was a clever way to raise more money. Others thought it was a trap. At the small table in the back, the single father felt his heart beat faster. His hands rested on his lap. He had not played on a stage in years. Not since before his life changed. He told himself to stay seated. But something about the challenge stirred something old inside him. The billionaire leaned lightly against the piano. "What is the matter?" she asked with a playful tone. "No one brave enough?" More laughter. The man slowly stood up. The movement was small, but in a silent room it felt loud. A few heads turned. He hesitated for half a second, then raised his hand. "I can play," he said. His voice was steady, though not loud. People near him looked surprised. One guest glanced at his suit and then back at the stage as if unsure this was serious. The billionaire's eyes found him. She studied him openly, taking in his modest clothes, his quiet posture. "You?" she asked, her eyebrows lifting slightly. He nodded once. She tilted her head. "Do you know Chopin?" "Yes," he answered. A few soft chuckles rose from nearby tables. Someone whispered that this would be entertaining. The billionaire smiled, but there was something sharp in it. "Very well," she said. "If you can play Chopin well enough to impress this room, I will donate from my personal inheritance fund. Every penny I promised tonight." There was a murmur at that. The amount she had hinted at earlier was enormous. Could change the foundation forever. Then she added, her voice carrying across the hall, "Play Chopin on my inheritance. Every penny yours." The line felt heavy in the air. Some guests laughed openly now. To them it sounded like a joke. A dramatic moment designed for headlines the next day. The man felt heat rise to his face, but he did not sit back down. "All right," he said quietly. He began walking toward the stage. Each step felt longer than the last. The polished floor reflected his image back at him, small and alone against the glow of gold light. He was aware of the eyes following him, some curious, some amused, some doubtful. As he climbed the short steps to the stage, he caught a glimpse of the piano up close. The keys were smooth, untouched that evening. The bench stood perfectly centered. He paused beside the instrument. The billionaire stepped slightly aside but remained close. "Please," she said, gesturing with one elegant hand. "Show us what you can do." Her tone held confidence. She did not expect to be surprised. He took a slow breath. For a brief second, the noise of the room faded in his mind. He thought of late nights in his small living room, the old upright piano pushed against the wall. He thought of tiny footsteps padding across the floor. He thought of a young voice once asking him to play something soft before bedtime. He sat down on the bench, creaked faintly under his weight. He adjusted it by instinct, sliding it forward a little. His hands hovered above the keys but did not touch them yet. From the audience, a glass clinked against another. Someone shifted in their chair. The camera zoomed in. The billionaire crossed her arms loosely, watching. The man lowered his hands onto the keyboard. The first note had not yet been played, but something in the room had already changed. The laughter had quieted. Even those who expected a mistake leaned forward slightly. He closed his eyes for just a moment. Then he pressed the first key. The sound was soft but clear. It carried through the ballroom like a single drop of water in still air. A second note followed. Then another. The beginning was simple, careful. The audience waited. And the night, which had started as a show of wealth and pride, slowly began to turn into something no one had planned for. The first few notes settled gently into the room, like someone testing the temperature of water before stepping in. Many in the audience still expected a mistake. They waited for his fingers to slip or for the melody to fall apart. But it didn't. The music grew steadier. His hands began to move with more confidence, gliding across the keys in smooth patterns. The soft introduction slowly turned into something fuller. The sound of Chopin filled the ballroom, not loud or showy, but deep and clear. At one of the front tables, a woman who had studied piano as a child stopped mid-sip and lowered her glass. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt, but in surprise. This was not random playing. This was trained, controlled. On stage, the billionaire shifted her weight. She had expected hesitation. Instead, she saw focus. His shoulders relaxed as the piece continued. His face, which had looked tense moments earlier, now held calm. As the music unfolded, it carried emotion that was hard to ignore. There was sadness in it, but also strength. A kind of quiet determination. For him, the room began to disappear. In his mind, he was no longer standing under bright chandeliers. He was back in a small apartment years ago, sitting beside his wife on an old couch. She had loved when he played Chopin. She used to close her eyes and say it made her feel safe. He remembered the hospital room, the beeping machines, the silence afterward. He remembered going home alone for the first time. The music deepened. In the audience, the laughter from earlier had completely faded. People were no longer watching to be entertained. They were listening. His fingers moved faster now, flowing through a more difficult section of the piece. The notes rose and fell like waves. Not rushed, not forced. A man near the back leaned toward his wife and whispered, "He's good." She nodded without looking away from the stage. The billionaire uncrossed her arms. Her expression changed from amusement to something more thoughtful. She studied his hands, the precision, the memory in his movements. This was not someone who had picked up the piano as a hobby. The music shifted into a passage that required control and strength. His wrists lifted slightly, then dropped with perfect timing. Each chord landed clean. The grand piano responded with rich, full sound that echoed gently against the high ceiling. He was no longer thinking about the money. He was not thinking about the people watching. He was playing the way he used to play late at night, when the world was quiet and it was just him and the keys. Years ago, he had trained seriously. As a teenager, he practiced for hours each day in a small music school not far from his childhood home. His teacher had been strict, rarely giving praise. "Feel the story," the teacher would say. "Don't just play the notes." He carried that lesson with him even now. Life had pulled him away from that world. When his wife became sick, hospital visits replaced rehearsals. Bills replaced sheet music. After she passed, survival became his only goal. He took whatever work he could find. Construction jobs, night shifts, delivery routes, anything that kept food on the table and a roof overhead. There were nights when exhaustion pressed down on him so heavily that he could barely stand. But after putting his young daughter to bed, he would sit at the old upright piano in the corner of their living room. The instrument was chipped along the edges. 2 keys were slightly out of tune. Still, it held together. He would play softly so he wouldn't wake her. Sometimes, she would peek around the hallway corner instead of sleeping. She would sit quietly on the floor and listen. When he noticed her, he would pretend not to, allowing her to think she was invisible. "Play the soft one," she once whispered. He always knew which one she meant. Back in the ballroom, his hands moved into the heart of the piece. The melody swelled. It was no longer just careful notes. It was alive. Several guests felt a chill move through them. It was the kind of performance that makes people forget where they are. A camera operator near the stage adjusted the focus. The lens zoomed in on his face. There was no sign of fear now, only concentration. The billionaire stepped closer to the piano, not enough to distract him, but enough to hear more clearly. The sound was not perfect in a technical way alone. Carried something else. Experience. Pain. Hope. The foundation's director, seated near the front, pressed a hand against her chest. She had attended countless events, heard countless speeches about passion for the arts. But this felt real. As he entered a fast, demanding section, a few people held their breath. His fingers crossed over each other with practiced ease. The movement looked natural, almost effortless. The applause that had once seemed ready to mock him was now waiting to celebrate him. The billionaire remembered her grandmother's words about pressure revealing talent. She had repeated that story many times, often with pride. Tonight, those words echoed differently in her mind. Had she expected this? No. Had she underestimated him? Clearly. The piece began to approach its emotional peak. The melody climbed higher, brighter, then dipped into softer tones again. It was like watching someone tell their life story without speaking. In the back of the room, a young server stopped walking and stood still, tray in hand. Even staff members were listening now. The single father felt a warmth in his chest that he had not felt in years. It was not pride. It was release. For so long, he had hidden this part of himself. It felt selfish to focus on music when there were responsibilities waiting. So he kept it quiet, tucked away like an old photograph. Tonight, under bright lights and doubtful eyes, it had found space again. The music softened into a delicate passage. His fingers barely touched the keys, yet the sound carried to the farthest corners of the room. The billionaire lowered her gaze for a moment. She realized that what had started as a bold challenge now felt like a lesson. He was not playing to prove her wrong. He was playing because this was who he was. The final section approached slowly. There was one more build, one more climb before the end. He opened his eyes briefly and looked out at the sea of faces. None were laughing now. Many were still. Some looked moved. A few blinked away sudden tears they did not expect. He turned back to the piano. The last crescendo rose strong and full, filling the ballroom with sound that felt almost too big for the space. Then, with careful control, he guided the piece toward its closing notes. Each final key was pressed with intention. The last note lingered in the air. Silence followed. It was not awkward silence. It was the kind that comes when people need a second to return to reality. His hands remained on the keys for a moment longer before he slowly lifted them. He did not look at the billionaire first. He looked down at the piano. Then he stood. The silence broke into applause. Not scattered. Not polite. It was loud. Several people rose to their feet. The sound of clapping echoed off the walls, louder than any laughter earlier that night. The billionaire remained still for a second, absorbing what had just happened. The man stepped back from the piano, his expression calm but his eyes slightly glassy. He had not just played music. He had revealed a part of his life that most people in that room would never understand. And now, every eye turned toward the woman who had made the promise. The applause did not stop quickly. It rolled through the ballroom in waves, strong and steady. Some people were clapping with wide smiles. Others looked thoughtful, almost shaken. A few stood with both hands raised, as if they had just witnessed something rare. He stood beside the piano, unsure what to do next. He was not used to this kind of attention. His life had become small and practical over the years: work, home, bills, school runs, groceries. Applause belonged to another lifetime. The billionaire finally stepped forward. Her face no longer carried that playful, sharp smile from earlier. She looked at him carefully, as if seeing him for the first time. The room slowly quieted again, waiting. She picked up the microphone, but for a moment she did not speak. The silence felt different now. It was not filled with doubt. It was filled with expectation. "You said you could play," she began, her voice softer than before. "And you did more than that." A small ripple of agreement moved through the audience. She turned slightly toward him. "That was beautiful." He gave a small nod, not trusting his voice yet. There was a pause, and then she faced the crowd again. "A promise is a promise." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Earlier in the evening, she had announced that if someone could impress the room with Chopin, she would donate a large portion from her personal inheritance fund to the foundation. At the time, it had felt like a safe challenge. Now it was very real. Her assistant, who had been standing near the side of the stage, stepped forward with a tablet. The billionaire glanced at the screen, then back at the audience. "I will transfer the full amount as pledged," she said clearly. "Every penny." A loud cheer broke out. Some guests looked genuinely excited, knowing how much this would help the foundation. Others looked impressed by her public follow-through. But her attention returned to the man beside the piano. "And I would like to know something," she added, lowering the microphone slightly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The question was not sharp. It was honest. He hesitated. Speaking felt harder than playing. "I studied when I was young," he said finally. His voice was calm but quiet. The microphone was held closer so the audience could hear. "I trained for years." "Why did you stop?" she asked. The question hung in the air. He could have given a short answer. He could have brushed it off. But something about the night made him feel open. "Life changed," he said simply. There was no drama in his tone. No attempt to gain sympathy. Just truth. The billionaire studied his face, as if trying to read the parts he was not saying. The foundation's director stepped onto the stage as well, thanking both of them for the unforgettable moment. She spoke about how the donation would expand music programs into more neighborhoods, how more children would have access to instruments and lessons. As she spoke, he stepped slightly back from the center of attention. He felt almost relieved that the focus was shifting. But the story was not finished. Guests began whispering among themselves again, though this time their whispers carried admiration instead of doubt. "I can't believe he's not a professional," one person said. "He should be," another replied. The billionaire leaned closer to him, speaking more quietly now so only those near the stage could hear. "Would you stay for a moment after this?" she asked. He looked at her, surprised. "Of course." She nodded. The event moved forward, though it felt changed. Other speakers came up. More donations were announced. But the energy of the room had shifted. The earlier sense of pride and display had softened into something more thoughtful. Many eyes continued drifting toward him at the side of the stage. After the formal program ended, guests began to stand and move around the ballroom again. Some approached the stage, hoping to speak with him. The first was an older man who introduced himself as a retired music teacher. He shook his hand firmly. "That was not just skill," the man said. "That was heart." "Thank you," he replied. A woman told him her son had just started piano lessons and asked what piece he would recommend for a beginner. He answered kindly, suggesting something simple and encouraging her to let her son enjoy the process. Each conversation felt strange to him. He was not used to being asked for advice about music. Across the room, the billionaire finished speaking with a group of reporters. When she was done, she walked directly toward him. Up close, without the stage lights and microphone, she seemed different. Still confident, but less guarded. "Walk with me," she said gently. They stepped away from the crowd toward a quieter corner of the ballroom near tall windows that overlooked the city lights. For a moment, neither spoke. "You embarrassed me tonight," she said finally, though there was no anger in her voice. He looked surprised. "That wasn't my intention." "I know," she replied. "That's why it worked." She looked out at the city below. "I thought it would be entertaining. A bold challenge. Something dramatic. I didn't expect." She paused. "I didn't expect to feel something." He stayed silent, letting her finish. "My grandmother truly loved Chopin," she continued, "but I never learned. I was too busy with business school, with building companies. I always told myself I didn't have time for things like that." She turned to face him. "You walked up there with nothing to prove. And yet you proved something." He shook his head slightly. "I just played." "Exactly," she said. There was a softness in her expression now. A kind of humility that had not been there earlier. "Do you still play often?" she asked. "At home," he answered. "When I can." "Why not more?" He hesitated again, then gave the honest answer. "Because responsibilities come first." She studied him carefully. "You have children?" "One," he said. A small smile touched his face. "A daughter." Her expression shifted again, this time with curiosity. "Does she know how well you play?" He thought about the little hallway corner, about quiet evenings. "She listens," he said. "That's enough." For a moment, the busy sounds of the ballroom felt far away. "I made that promise lightly," the billionaire admitted. "I won't do that again." He gave a small, understanding nod. "I meant what I said," she added. "The donation will go through tonight. But I'd like to do something more." He looked at her, unsure. "I would like to support individual musicians too," she continued. "People who had to step away from their art because life demanded it. I think there are more stories like yours out there." He listened carefully. He had learned not to trust big words too quickly. But her tone felt sincere. "That would help many people," he said. "And would you consider performing again?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "I haven't thought about that in years," he admitted. "You should," she said firmly. "Talent like that should not stay hidden in a living room." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had carried heavy tools during the day and now carried music at night. "I'll think about it," he said. Across the room, someone called her name. She glanced back, then returned her attention to him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For reminding me that money can fund art, but it can't replace it." He did not know how to respond to that. As the night continued, more guests approached him. Some offered business cards. A few mentioned small concert opportunities. One person even suggested recording a video performance. He accepted each card politely, though he did not know what he would do with them. When the event finally began to wind down, he stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered, and the noise from inside the hotel felt distant. He took a deep breath. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from home. "Are you done yet?" It read. "Don't forget to bring dessert." He smiled. For all the applause and attention, his real life waited in a small apartment across town. A place with worn furniture, school school papers on the fridge, and an old upright piano in the corner. He looked back once at the glowing windows of the ballroom. Tonight had changed something. He could feel it, but he did not yet know how far that change would go. The drive home felt quieter than usual. The city lights passed by his car window in long streaks of yellow and white. He kept both hands on the steering wheel, replaying the night in his mind. The applause, the questions, the look on the billionaire's face when the music ended. It all felt distant now, like something he had watched in a movie instead of lived through. He stopped at a small bakery that was still open and bought a simple chocolate cake, just as he had promised. The woman at the counter did not know that he had just played in front of some of the wealthiest people in the city. To her, he was just another tired customer at the end of the night. He liked that feeling. When he opened the door to his apartment, the smell of home greeted him. It was a mix of laundry soap and the dinner they had eaten earlier. Small shoes were left near the couch. A backpack rested against the wall. His daughter ran out of her room as soon as she heard him. "You're late," she said, but she was smiling. "I know," he replied, holding up the cake box. "But I remembered." Her eyes lit up. "Did you play?" He paused for a second. "Yes." "Did you mess up?" she asked honestly. He laughed softly. "No, I didn't." She looked proud, as if she had expected nothing less. "I told you," she said. "You always play it right." He set the cake on the kitchen counter and cut 2 small slices. They sat at the tiny table near the window, sharing the dessert. She talked about her school project and how her friend had forgotten their lines during a class play. He listened closely, asking questions, nodding, smiling. He did not talk much about the gala. Not yet. After she went to bed, he stood in the living room, looking at the old upright piano. The wood was scratched in places. One pedal squeaked when pressed too hard. He sat down slowly and rested his hands on the keys. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He played a few notes, not the full piece from earlier, just fragments. The sound was thinner than the grand piano at the hotel, but it felt warmer. His phone buzzed again. This time it was not a simple message. It was a notification from social media. Then another. Then another. He frowned and unlocked the screen. Someone had posted a video of his performance. It had already been shared hundreds of times. He scrolled slowly, reading the comments. Who is this man? Why haven't we heard of him before? That billionaire underestimated him. Some comments focused on the challenge itself. Others focused on the music. He felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride, discomfort, surprise. Another notification appeared. A message request from someone he did not know. It was from a small local concert hall. They wanted to know if he would consider performing at an upcoming event. He stared at the message for a long time. Performing again had once been his dream. But dreams change when life changes. He placed the phone down on top of the piano and leaned back on the bench. Could he really step back into that world? The next morning, his routine began as usual. Alarm at 6. Breakfast. School drop-off. Work. At the construction site where he worked, the air smelled of dust and fresh wood. The sound of drills and hammering filled the space. His coworkers greeted him with the same casual nods as always. "Big night?" one of them asked, having heard that he was attending some fancy event. "It was something," he replied simply. He did not mention the performance. By lunchtime, his phone had dozens of missed calls and messages. He stepped aside and checked them. 2 local news outlets wanted to interview him. A radio station asked if he would come on air to talk about the moment. Even the foundation's director had sent a message thanking him again and telling him that the donation had already been processed. He leaned against a wall and closed his eyes for a moment. This was more attention than he had ever wanted. Later that afternoon, he received a call from an unknown number. He almost ignored it but decided to answer. It was the billionaire. Her voice sounded different from the night before. More direct. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said. "I'm at work," he replied, stepping away from the noise. "But it's okay. I won't take long," she said. "The video has gone everywhere." I imagine you've seen it. Yes. There are opportunities coming your way, she continued. Some of them may not be serious. Some may be. I would like to help you sort through them. He stayed quiet. I owe you that, she added. You don't owe me anything, he said. I made a public challenge, she replied. You answered it. The least I can do is make sure this doesn't become overwhelming for you. Her words did not sound like a business move. They sounded personal. I appreciate that, he said. Can we meet tomorrow? She asked. Somewhere simple. No cameras. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to keep distance. Another part knew this might shape what came next. Okay, he agreed. That evening, after dinner, he told his daughter a little more about what had happened. There were a lot of people, he said, and they were very quiet when I played. Like when I listen? She asked. Exactly like that. She thought about it seriously. Are you going to be famous now? He smiled. I don't know. She considered this. If you are, can we still have pancakes on Saturdays? Always, he promised. The next day, he met the billionaire at a small cafe away from the city center. She arrived without security or photographers. She wore simple clothes instead of designer gowns. When she saw him, she stood and offered a polite handshake. I meant what I said, she began once they sat down. There are real offers here. Concert halls, recordings, even sponsorships. She slid a folder across the table. He opened it slowly. Each page listed names of venues and contact information. Some were modest. Others were well known. I don't understand why this is happening, he admitted. It's simple, she said. People connect with authenticity. You didn't perform to impress anyone. That's rare. He looked at the pages again. I have a full-time job, he said. I can't just leave. I'm not suggesting you do, she replied. But maybe there's a middle ground. She leaned forward slightly. What if you performed occasionally? Weekends, special events. And what if part of the earnings supported other single parents who had to give up their creative paths? He looked up at her. You really want to do that? He asked. Yes, she said without hesitation. Last night showed me something. I've invested in companies my whole life. I've built numbers on screens. But I've never invested in a story like yours. He sat back thinking. This was not just about him anymore. It was about example. About showing his daughter that it was possible to carry responsibility and still hold on to passion. What would it look like? He asked slowly. We start small, she said. One performance. Controlled. No pressure. We build from there. He stared out the cafe window at people walking by, living ordinary lives. His life had been ordinary too. In many ways, he liked it that way. But something inside him had woken up on that stage. He turned back to her. One performance, he said. She smiled. Not in triumph, but in relief. Good, she replied. As they stood to leave, he felt both nervous and hopeful. The challenge that had once felt like a public test had become a doorway. And for the first time in years, he was considering what might be on the other side. The days after the cafe meeting moved quickly. He went back to work as usual, but his mind was no longer fully on the noise of drills and the weight of wood panels. During breaks, he checked his phone and reread the messages from concert halls and small event organizers. Some offers were too big. Some felt too rushed. But one stood out. It was a small theater not far from his neighborhood. The stage was simple. The seats were old but clean. The manager had written a short message saying they had seen the video and would be honored to host his first public performance since the gala. Felt safe. That evening, he told his daughter about the idea. So you're going to play again? She asked, sitting cross-legged on the couch. Maybe, he said. Just one concert. To see how it feels. She smiled wide. Can I sit in the front? You'll have the best seat in the house, he promised. He called the billionaire later that night and told her about the small theater. That's perfect, she said. No pressure. Just music. She offered to cover the costs quietly so ticket prices could stay low. He agreed, but only if her name was not placed in bold letters across the posters. This isn't about headlines, he told her. I understand, she replied. They decided that a portion of the ticket sales would go toward a small fund for parents who once studied music but had to stop because of family duties. It would start small, but it would be real. The weeks leading up to the concert were different from anything he had felt in years. After work, instead of collapsing into bed early, he sat at the upright piano and practiced seriously again. He worked through scales slowly, then moved into full pieces. Some nights he stumbled. His fingers were not as strong as they once were. His timing needed sharpening. But he did not give up. His daughter often sat nearby with her homework, listening. Sometimes she corrected him playfully. You played that faster at the fancy place, she would say. He would laugh. Then I better fix it. As the concert date approached, simple posters began appearing around the neighborhood. They did not show a glamorous photo. Just his name, the word piano, and the date. At work, one of his coworkers saw the poster online. Is this you? He asked, holding up his phone. He nodded. You've been hiding on us? The coworker joked. But there was respect in his voice. On the morning of the concert, he woke up earlier than usual. His stomach felt tight. Not with fear exactly, but with awareness. This time, people were coming specifically to hear him. It was not a surprise moment. It was intentional. He made breakfast quietly while his daughter got dressed. Are you nervous? She asked. A little, he admitted. That's good, she said seriously. It means you care. He looked at her and smiled. Sometimes she spoke with wisdom beyond her years. The small theater filled slowly that evening. Families arrived. Elderly couples. Young students carrying notebooks. Some people recognized him from the viral video. Others had simply heard that something special might happen. Backstage, he stood near the curtain, listening to the low murmur of voices. The piano on stage was not as grand as the one at the gala, but it was well-tuned and cared for. The billionaire sat quietly in the back row, dressed simply, almost blending in. She had insisted on no special treatment. When the theater manager introduced him, the applause was warm but not overwhelming. Felt human. He walked onto the stage slowly. The lights were softer than at the gala. The space felt smaller, closer. He could see faces clearly. In the very front row, his daughter waved both hands. He sat at the piano and took a deep breath. This time, he did not play the same piece as the gala. He chose a program that told a story. Some Chopin, yes, but also a few other works that had carried him through different seasons of his life. The first piece began gently. The sound filled the theater in a warm, steady way. There was no tension in the room, only listening. As he moved into the second piece, he felt his confidence grow. His fingers were stronger now. Practice had done its work. Halfway through the performance, he paused to speak briefly. I stepped away from music for many years, he said honestly. Not because I stopped loving it, but because life asked me to focus somewhere else. Tonight means a lot to me. He did not say more. He did not need to. The audience understood. When he began the final piece, the same Chopin work from the gala, the room became very still. People recognized it. They leaned forward. But this time it felt different. At the gala, the music had been a response to a challenge. Tonight it was an offering. He played with freedom, not pressure. The notes flowed naturally. There were small imperfections here and there, but they made it feel alive. In the front row, his daughter watched without blinking. In the back row, the billionaire felt her throat tighten. She had funded massive projects before, built towers and tech platforms, but this small theater felt more meaningful than any of them. When the final note faded, the silence lasted only a second before the audience rose to their feet. The standing ovation was not loud like at the gala. It was steady and heartfelt. He stood and bowed, feeling something settle inside him. After the concert, people lined up to thank him. A young mother approached with tears in her eyes. I used to sing, she said softly. I stopped when my children were born. Tonight reminded me that I don't have to let it disappear. He nodded, understanding completely. The billionaire joined him near the side of the stage once the crowd thinned. You were different tonight, she said. So was the room, he replied. She smiled. The fund already has its first donations, she told him quietly. Not from me. From people in the audience. He looked surprised. They believe in this, she said. He glanced around the small theater one more time. This was not about fame. It was not about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about reopening doors that had quietly closed. Later that night, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she looked up at him and said, "You looked happy." "I was," he answered. "Are you going to keep playing?" He thought about the construction site, the bills, the early mornings. He thought about the stage lights and the faces in the crowd. "Yes," he said gently. "I think I am." She smiled and closed her eyes. He walked back into the living room and sat at the upright piano once more. He did not play a full piece, just a few soft notes. The same notes he used to play when the world felt heavy. But tonight they felt lighter. The challenge that had once started as a public test had turned into something steady and real. And this time he was not playing to survive. He was playing to live. Months passed, but the night at the gala still followed him in quiet ways. The small theater concert had opened a door, and he had chosen not to close it again. He did not quit his job. He still woke before sunrise. He still packed lunches and checked homework and paid bills at the kitchen table. But on certain weekends, he stepped onto different stages. Community halls, school auditoriums, small city venues that valued feeling over fame. Each performance was different. Some were nearly full. Others had empty seats scattered across the room. He learned not to measure success by numbers. He measured it by silence. If a room grew still in the middle of a piece, he knew something real was happening. The small fund they had started also began to grow. At first, it helped one parent pay for evening music lessons. Then it covered the cost of a second-hand violin for someone who had sold theirs years ago. Slowly, quietly, stories began to surface. A father who once studied trumpet but stopped after twins were born. A mother who gave up dance training to work double shifts. A grandmother who always wanted to sing but never had the chance. The fund did not make them famous. It gave them time. A few hours each week to return to something that once made them feel alive. The billionaire kept her word. She did not take over the project. She supported it from the background. She connected them with advisors who knew how to manage growing interest without turning it into a spectacle. She also changed in ways few people saw. Instead of dramatic public challenges, she began funding long-term art programs in quiet neighborhoods. She attended small recitals without media coverage. She even started taking piano lessons herself. The first time she admitted that to him, she seemed almost embarrassed. "I can barely play a scale," she said with a small laugh. "That's how it starts," he replied. One evening, after a modest performance at a school auditorium, she stayed behind to listen as children tried simple melodies on stage. She did not stand apart from them. She sat in the front row and clapped like everyone else. For him, the biggest change happened at home. His daughter began asking for lessons of her own. Not because she felt pressure. Not because she wanted attention. She simply wanted to understand the music she had heard her whole life. He found a local teacher who agreed to give her a fair rate. The first time she practiced seriously, she grew frustrated. "My fingers don't move like yours," she complained. "They didn't," he said gently. "Not at first." He showed her how to slow down, how to repeat a small section instead of rushing through the whole piece. He did not raise his voice. He remembered what it felt like to struggle. Slowly, her hands grew more confident. One Saturday morning, months after the gala, she asked him to sit on the couch while she played something she had learned. It was simple, a beginner's piece. The timing was not perfect, but she played it from start to finish without stopping. When she finished, she looked at him nervously. "Well?" she asked. He stood and clapped as if she had filled a concert hall. "That was beautiful," he said honestly. She smiled in a way that told him she believed him. Later that night, after she went to bed, he sat alone at the upright piano. He thought about the path that had brought him here. The hospital room years ago. The long nights of exhaustion. The quiet playing in the dark so he would not wake a sleeping child. He had once believed that part of his life was over. But it had only been waiting. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from the foundation's director. She shared news that the original donation from the gala had now funded music programs in 3 new community centers. Children who had never touched a piano before were now learning their first notes. He stared at the message for a long time. One moment of courage had led to this. He did not feel proud in a loud way. He felt grateful. A few weeks later, the small theater that had hosted his first concert invited him back for a special event. This time, it was not just his performance. Several parents who had received support from the fund would also share the stage. On the night of the event, the atmosphere felt warm and relaxed. No red carpets, no sharp challenges, just people who once thought their creative lives were finished. He opened the evening with a short piece. Not dramatic, not complex, just steady. Then he stepped aside and let others play. A father with nervous hands performed a simple trumpet melody. A mother sang softly into a microphone, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger by the second verse. The audience listened with the same respect they had shown him months earlier. The billionaire sat among them, her hands folded in her lap. At the end of the evening, the theater manager asked him to say a few words. He walked to the front of the stage and looked out at the crowd. "I was challenged once," he began. "Not in anger, but in pride. I walked to a piano thinking I had something to prove. I didn't. I just had something to share." The room was quiet. Many of us think that when life becomes heavy, we have to put away the parts of ourselves that feel like dreams. But sometimes those parts are the very things that help us carry the weight. He paused. "I am still a working father. I still wake up early. I still worry about bills. But I also play. And that has changed everything." He did not speak for long. He did not need to. The applause that followed was not for perfection. It was for honesty. After the event ended, the billionaire approached him outside the theater. "You know," she said, looking up at the night sky, "that one sentence I said at the gala, it could have gone very differently." He smiled slightly. "Maybe. I'm glad it didn't," she replied. "So am I." They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. The city around them moved as it always had. Cars passed. Streetlights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughed. Nothing about the world looked dramatically different. But for him it was. He drove home that night with the windows slightly open, cool air brushing against his face. When he stepped into his apartment, he saw sheet music spread across the kitchen table. His daughter had been practicing again. He picked up one of the pages and smiled. The notes were simple, clear, full of possibility. He walked to the upright piano and sat down. This time he did not think about the gala. He did not think about applause or viral videos or wealthy promises. He thought about the small living room, the steady life he had built, the courage it had taken to stand up when laughter filled the air. He placed his hands on the keys. The first note rang out softly, not as a challenge, not as a response, but as a choice. And in that quiet room, the music felt richer than any inheritance.